Hi, and welcome to Hobby's YouTube channel. Today, I am very honored to talk with Xandy Peters, also known as Knit Boldly. And I am so happy we get to have this chat right before Munich Knits, where we will actually meet in person this year. Welcome, Sandy.
Hi, and good afternoon. I think it is for you here. It's pretty early in the morning.
What's your time at the moment?
Um, 9 a.m.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, it's around 3:15 here. So, but I'm very honored that you could make the time and that you got up early, maybe. I am so happy we have a chance to talk today because in Munich Knits, at Munich Knits, we will actually meet because you will be teaching there and I will be vending there. And I have some test knitters or some sample knitters working out some of your patterns for me to showcase at the festival. And I am so happy that we get to talk in depth about your work as a designer and how you became a designer. And can you tell us a little about the journey? How did you first get started?
Well, I first learned to knit from my mother when I was pretty young. I was 5 years old, so it's been a while that I've been knitting as a hobby. But in terms of designing, I started out a little bit later, obviously. I was in college when I started designing patterns, and um, it's one of the only things, because I learned to knit when I was only 5. It's one of the only jobs I feel like I can say I've got 30 plus years of experience at my age. Um, so when I started to design those patterns, I was not really doing it, looking at doing it as a serious job. I started out because it was a nice hobby that I was already making some new things and writing some patterns down, and I just wanted to share some of them.
Yes, and before you turned to knitting, knitwear designing, you worked in footwear and product design. And how did that experience and shape your approach to stitches and fabric?
Well, one of the ways that footwear was helpful um, was because there are so many knit fabrics that are used in sneakers, and I was working as a sneaker designer, or I was working towards becoming a sneaker designer. I also worked at some other types of companies doing other types of footwear. But in terms of how it helped me shape how I look at fabric, I think shoes are an interesting part of product design because they're soft and they're a fashion item, but they're also three-dimensional and they have a pretty clear form. So instead of just always thinking about fabric as something that's a surface, you can stitch it together from a flat pattern. A lot of the time, I think of fabric as something that's easy to make into something three-dimensional or to use a 3D pattern with. Um, and I think that's one of the biggest um, ways that working in footwear influenced how I look at textiles.
And you call yourself Stitch Inventor, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the perfect title for you. But do you remember the first moment when you thought, I want to invent that kind of stitch?
Yeah, I actually remember. Um, well, I didn't start out when I was doing knit designs. I didn't start out with the intention of always making new stitches, and I don't always make something up that's totally original or unique, but it's become something that I've been doing because I remember sitting down and purposefully thinking, oh, I think I could go back to school and get a degree in textiles instead of product design, learn a little bit more about the technical aspects of fabric if I could come up with something good for a portfolio. So I actually sat down when I was looking into the stack stitch technique that I'll be teaching in Munich. I actually sat down with the intention of inventing that, even though I didn't know how to do it yet. I kind of knew what I wanted it to look like. So it was a very intentional process. And since then, it's been something that I try to think about. I try to always offer something new, even if the stitch isn't the new thing. I like to have something new and exciting for people in every one of my patterns.
And that's a job well done as far as I'm concerned. What does your design process look like from idea to finished pattern? Do you sketch? Do you swatch? Do you use any digital tools or anything?
I like to use whatever makes the most sense for whatever I'm working on. So sometimes I'll be working on a pattern and I'll have the stitch in mind and I don't really need to swatch. I can go straight to drawing on paper. Other times I um, am not sure exactly what I'm trying to make and I'm just playing around with some stitches that I find interesting to start out. So I'll end up with a bunch of different types of techniques or some specific technique that I'm working on, and I'll swatch as many different ideas using that stitch as possible, and then put that into an object. So it starts in a different place each time I'm working. It's a combination of sketching on paper and drawing in Adobe Illustrator is a tool that I use a lot, or actually knitting something and then developing the sketches after that.
Okay, and how do you handle failed experiments? Can you share a time where something went wrong, but it led to a breakthrough?
It happens all the time that something isn't quite right for a project, and I actually brought um, an example of where those failed projects go. So I have a bunch of shoe boxes, and this isn't actually, I also put some stuff in to show and tell today, but when I'm working on a project and I'm not sure what to do with the swatches I make, they go into a box and I keep them. And when I'm not sure what I'm working on and I'm looking for inspiration, I go back into the box and look and say, well, maybe this stitch, which is some long stitches happening here with a stacked stitch there in the valley. Maybe this didn't work for the projects in the past, but in the future, if I'm looking for something interesting, this might be the right stitch, or there are any other things that are in the box. I always have something to draw from, even if I feel like I'm out of ideas at the moment, because all the failed ideas that don't find a place to go get saved.
That looked like a very interesting fabric, by the way. So I hope it ends up in a design someday. The one that you showed, it's
You
beautiful.
know, it's it's a little tricky because it's very open, and I'm not sure it needs to hang in a certain direction to look like anything. But also, I think it's a good argument. Eventually, maybe what I really need to do is I need to put together some stitch dictionaries because I have boxes, multiple boxes of things that never get used and kind of sit there waiting. Sometimes they're even written up or charted in some way so that there really is a pattern that people could go from. And I end up not finding anything specific that works with that stitch, so it ends up sitting there for years. So maybe eventually I'll need to start putting together something that's just a few interesting stitch ideas.
That sounds nice. I would definitely look forward to that. Um, what tools or yarns do you prefer when you're designing something experimental?
So I think you might have seen a little bit in the box that I have here, or if I just grab some swatches from the stack stitch class when I was designing the stack stitch technique projects, you can see all of these are pretty much worked in the same basic solid color yarn. It's either the acrylic that you'd use to make a blanket, the really cheap acrylic, which feels kind of like wool, or I just use plain wool yarn, because it's pretty basic, and I generally don't enjoy doing projects that are too dependent on the materials. I like when they look good in a variety of things, and so when I use basic yarn to design in or to swatch with, um, it gives me a lot more options of where I can go with that thing next. It can be still a plain yarn, or I can pick something that's a little bit more interesting in some ways, but I know that at least the base stitch will work, and it will work with something that's easy to find no matter where people live, which is important because I have a lot of customers who are overseas and have different supplies that they can get their hands on.
Yes, well, for example, in your latest design, the one that uses brushed mohair or the unbrushed mohair?
Yeah,
I
the
think
unbrushed.
brushed. The unbrushed. Okay, I can't find it here. So I don't have a sample knitter knitting that one because I just could not find the right material. Otherwise, I would be really interested to put it in the shop. So, but that has to wait. I have to search for a little longer, I guess.
So that's kind of an exception to the rule where I did use this yarn that I found at a shop. The yarn is originally from Australia, and the company has since, I think, closed and sold their stock to the retailer in the US. But um, it is an interesting yarn because most mohair is brushed, and so it's kind of fuzzy. And the yarn for that project is not fuzzy, um, but it acts like some other yarns, like silk, a silk blend, or it almost um, it almost doesn't matter because it's just a lace project. So if you want that very shiny effect, you can use something like the unbrushed mohair if you can find it, or a silk, and I would say a silk and wool blend or something that's partly viscose would work as well. Without it feeling like mohair, it'll be slightly different, but it looks just fine in a plain yarn, and that's how I developed the project. It just so happened to be something where the fancy yarn came up, and so that's what I mean by like I try to work in things where even if you can't get the exact thing, that it still looks okay in a lot of the things you can use to make it. And I think that's the advantage sometimes of making an accessory where with the sweater you can't really do that because it changes the gauge and it changes the size too much, and it changes the fabric too much. But for accessories where it's a scarf, it's always nice if I can find something as a stitch that works with a variety of materials. And um, some people don't. Some people are allergic to mohair or they don't like it, so it's good for that as well.
Yeah, so I might try it in just a plain fingering weight yarn. I will just have to swatch it for myself and see how I like it because I really like that design as well.
I'm working on it,
Um,
and I would
yeah.
show it to you. It's right here. I'm working on it right now in a plain wool. I happen to have it. It's a totally different size, but this is an example of, instead of a fingering weight mohair, this is a lace weight. It's spinny, the Norwegian. I think it's a Norwegian wool.
Hmm.
Um, and you can see it's not, maybe you can tell, it's not very drapey. It's kind of, you can't feel it, but if you're familiar with this kind of single ply rustic wool, it's kind of crunchy. It's a little crisp feeling, but it's still, you can see the lace stitches, so it still works as a pattern in that way. It's just not exactly the same feel. So it's kind of interesting and fun to get to play around with that with some of the more basic patterns that will allow anyway.
Yeah. Let's talk about foxpoles. What inspired you? Well, you already told I was working things out with those stacked stitches, but did you imagine that it would become so iconic?
First, let me grab the project here. I've got one of them so that people can see what we're talking about. So this is the fox paws pattern, and I called it that because you can see all of the little feet with the toes, 3 toes on each of the paws sticking up. And when I was working on this, which we talked a little bit about, I really wasn't thinking about it being a popular knitting pattern. It was something that I was interested in. It was something that I was making because I thought it would show to a school that if they had like scholarship money available or a spot available, because when you're going overseas, there are limited spots in most of these universities. I was hoping that it would show that I could innovate new stitches, even if I didn't know how to use the knitting machines yet. Right? That was my goal, was to just show that I could come up with something new, and that if they gave me a spot when they taught me how to use a knitting machine better, because I can use one a little bit, nothing like what they have at a university, but that it would, prove that it was worth their time and worth their while to have me there as a student. I thought that when I published the pattern, maybe a few people would be interested. I didn't think anyone would enjoy making it enough to finish the whole project because it's very complex and the stitches can be difficult to work, physically difficult to work. And it's a completely, or at least it was a completely new concept to people. So I really didn't think there would be that much interest.
I have had a fox pulse on the needles for several years now. I only work on it so much during winter most of the time, but I always tell people that are interested in fox poles that, well, they have to sit quietly, read carefully, and it can be done, but don't use bamboo needles because you will probably break them with all the massive increases and decreases. But I really enjoy working on it, but I don't do it for a long time in a row. I need to have my breaks every now and then. So, but there is a sample knitter working on a fox paws as well. So I'm very curious to see how that is looking. And the Skivias shawl, that's already finished and I will receive it in 2 weeks. So I'm very, very curious to see that one as well.
And that's a big project.
Um, that is a huge project. And my test knitter, my sample knitter was so fast. She had it finished in just a couple of weeks. So I am really curious to see it. So, and then I will bring it to Munich, of course. The Codebreaker scarf contains a hidden message. And what inspired you to embed storytelling into stitches like that?
Let me just grab that. This is the Codebreaker scarf. It's a kind of a parallelogram shape, and I don't know how well you can see. The background can be a little bit hard to see through, but it's got lace down one side and then solid garter stitch on the other. And each of these rows of lace, which if I hold it up higher, you can kind of see that they're staggered. Each row of lace has a different number of eyelets, and whatever that number is represents a different letter. So within the project, you can encode a phrase. And the reason that I was working on the reason that I was interested in working on something like this was because I teach a class called Introduction to Algorithmic Knitting, and I'll be teaching that in Munich, I think. And the idea of the class is that it uses a rule, or kind of like almost like a piece of code, to do a pattern. So whether it's something like the code breaker, where you say, okay, each letter is encoded as a number, and then each time I do a certain row in the pattern, I knit whatever that number is of eyelets. So something like that. That's the algorithm, is how you encode that message. Or any number of other patterns where they don't have an exact set of instructions telling you what to do in every single stitch. They tell you a rule to follow instead. So the idea for making a pattern like that came from the class, but the actual idea of encoding a message itself came from the idea that a lot of my customers, when they buy patterns, they're actually looking for a puzzle. They are going to make something. It can be whatever they want to make. Sometimes they have a project in mind that they want to do, or a type of project in mind that they want to do, but most of the time, what's really convincing them to pick up one project over another is the puzzle or challenge aspect. So I just assumed maybe some of them would like to decode a phrase, because when you get the pattern, actually you don't even have to get the pattern. You can get the phrase and try to decode it. It's something knitting related. It's not a big secret. It's just a fun puzzle. But when the pattern premiered, it premiered at a retreat. So everyone at the retreat was able, and I knew that would be happening. So everyone at the retreat was able to get their puzzle, and it gave them an activity to do, even if they couldn't really cast on the project and make a big one in the time that we had together. At least they could take out a pencil and get up in the morning and, start trying to solve the little encoded message and see if they could figure it out together. So it's basically a game. It was for fun.
Yeah, it sounds like so much fun. I have not decoded it yet. It is being sample knitted at the moment with a decoded message that I got to choose, of course. So, but I have not decoded yours yet. I should try and do that.
I have a few hints, but also a message for anyone who wants to encode a message. Um, there are more stitches in the project, and there's more space for eyelets in the project than there are letters in the alphabet. So there are places, if you need to add punctuation, you get, I think, up to 50 characters if you'd want that many, which is a lot of characters to encode. I don't mean the length of the message, just the number of symbols you can use. And the length of the message, you get about, well, you get, depends on what language you're probably working in, but you get 75 to 110 characters, I think. So there are a lot of things that you can encode when you're trying to figure out what you can do with that. I'm curious to see when you do, because I trust that you will probably eventually decode the message. I'm curious to see if the person in the message is as famous internationally as they are here in the United States, because the quote is, this is a hint, by someone who is very well known and influential here, but isn't still around. So,
Oh, that gives me a good idea.
and if you look at it, the other hint for those people who um, want the biggest clue about where to start decoding a message, when you are working with something, this is just like a symbol to number cipher. When you work with something
Mhm.
like that, the easiest place to start is with high frequency letters In English, that means E is the most common letter. I don't know if that helps you here. I can't guarantee it will. The most common character, though, is a space. So that one can really help people get started if you aren't sure what to decode first.
Okay, so I think that people might have needed your hints before because you are very aware of what good hints should give them a head start to actually decode the message.
And I think I put up the space hint somewhere, but I can't remember if I put it up um, just in the pattern once you download it, or if I put that on the internet somewhere to help people before they download the pattern, because you can just get the puzzle itself, but once you know the space trick, it's pretty clear at least where the words fall.
I am pretty sure the space trick is not in the pattern because I have been going through it and well, I did try a little bit, but I just didn't have enough time. So I'm going to go back to it and keep in mind that the space is the most common character. So I will let you know. I will hope to decode it before Munich. um, let's see. Looking back, which design makes you the proudest and which one is actually underappreciated by your opinion?
So I'm very proud of a lot of the brioche patterns that I've made. They're generally the closest of all my patterns to looking like something, like an object that's being um, drawn with pictures. So some people draw pictures in lace, and I like to do that with brioche stitch. So I'll put like flowers into something, and I'm working on another pattern now. I just like to make really complicated brioche patterns like that. And of all the patterns that I have, the one that I think is the most underrated, um, I pulled it out when I saw that you asked this question, and I have three of them. But I have this pattern here that's all um, garter stitch, and it's worked with a bunch of um, yarns working at once. So every color that you see in this project is active at once, and they all spiral around the project at the same time. It sounds hard, but it's actually really easy. Um, you work a yarn for 3 stitches and you drop it, and then you work the next yarn for 3 stitches and you drop it. And where the pattern changes directions, the yarns change direction. So they spiral this way first, then they spiral the other way. And it's just a really unusual pattern, but because I think people see that you need, these are all the fringes hanging, you need about 20 yarns and each one is 2 bobbins. People don't make it that often.
Now I want to make it.
It's really fun because it uses less. It's worsted weight. I don't know if you say worsted or eight ply. Um,
No, worst it.
it uses less than 10 meters of each color. So if you have, and you can do it with any weight as long as it's kind of all the same, like it scales. But I started it in fingering weight with 106 bobbins. I didn't end up finishing it because it wasn't as much fun as it sounded. But I used the yarn for something else. But you can use whatever weight you have a lot of in terms of scraps. And they're such short lengths that you don't really need to worry about even measuring. As long as you can make a little ball with them, you have enough yarn. So it's kind of unusual in that way because it uses so little of each color.
Yes, because it's just 3 stitches going back and forth, and so you can get a lot of your yard for your yardage. What's the name of this pattern?
It's called the color warp cowl. So, and this one uses this. The lengths of yarn were so short, I actually ran out of yarn. But the color warp cowl because it's supposed to be like a warp knit fabric, like Missoni would have big zigzags. This is the same kind of technique, where you'd be working a lot of colors at once, but usually the machine would be doing that for you.
I'm going to find it. I did knit your blooming brioche years ago when it was a knit along, I think. So I completely get what you are telling, that you want to put things in your design and make them visible, because that had the buds and the branches and the leaves, and it was a joy to knit it. So I'm going to find this one as well. I'm intrigued right away. So yeah, checking it out. How do you keep your creativity flowing over time, especially when people expect new innovations of you?
I think this is an interesting question because you already saw the box of things that I don't use. So I'm never really worried that I'll run out of ideas because they just get put aside. And sometimes I'll put them aside, and it's not just that I don't really know what they are going to be part of yet, but sometimes a stitch will be interesting, but I can't figure out in what way it's interesting. I just know something's going on, and maybe it looks terrible, but it's worth saving just to see how it kind of is made. Um, and those tend to be where I'll go if I feel like I'm running out of ideas. Because people, they do expect new things. But at the same time, I think they are also very happy to get a new pattern of an old idea as well.
And what feedback from knitters do you think is most helpful for you?
I think the thing that's helped me the most in terms of designing patterns, and I don't mean whatever object that is being made, like the design that people are knitting. I'm talking about the design of the files that I'm sending out. I get a lot of feedback on what is easy to understand, what parts of a pattern maybe don't make as much sense in writing. So you mentioned that you worked on the Blooming Brioche knit along. That's my second most popular pattern. And I think one of the reasons is because the long brioche definitions that don't make much sense in writing, they work, they're accurate, but when you read them, it's hard to find your place. I listened to what people wanted and made videos of each of those stitches. And it turned out that people really responded well to that. And it's been popular. I don't know if I've had a pattern that's had knit-alongs almost continuously since it was published. At some point during the year, there will be a knit-along somewhere in the world. And there's been a knit-along there have been many in Denmark. There's been one in Shanghai. There's been one at a shop in Japan. There's been knit-alongs of that pattern all over the world, and it's because you don't need to understand English to watch a video, and you don't need to understand English to read a brioche symbol either. So even though I'm working in a language, by taking the feedback of what people really wanted, in order to be able to learn a stitch, it's actually been so much more helpful for all sorts of people I never anticipated. I never really thought about, I think of knitting as technical writing, so I don't think about the descriptions and how easy they are to understand, because it's technical language. It's not always easy to understand, and there's a lot of directions, and if you don't remember the English word for left and the English word for right, it's awful to read through. It's hard for me, and I do remember what those things, how those are written. So the videos can be really helpful. And they just make it a lot more fun because I get to see people have success. Usually they're working with a shop. So there is a translation component in there that's being done by the shop, but um, just that amount of feedback on what was helpful, what's a good diagram to have, what's not helpful. And I'm always trying to make things better. So, you know, even still in the topic of brioche, sometimes those patterns can be overly complicated by the charts kind of have a lot more symbols than you really need once you know what's going on with brioche stitch. You don't need to know the little BR knit. Well, I know that it's knit. We're working in brioche stitch. I could have figured that out. Do I need the extra language there? Well, yes, I do. You do. But maybe there's another way to chart it alongside those two components that makes it really easy to visually understand as well. So I'm always looking into new things, especially when I hear things like, I love charts. This is what I got last week when I was teaching from some of my students. I love charts, except brioche charts. And the reason being, they like charts because they help describe how stitches relate from row to row and the order of things, where everything is. But in brioche stitch, it's hard to pick out the individual symbols that mean increase and decrease as opposed to just a regular knit or purl. So they're not quite as helpful for people. So what could we do to provide the traditional chart and also a visual guide that would be more helpful for people? Or how do we make the charts easier to visually understand? Sorry, that was a very long answer.
That's okay. Yeah, brioche charts are intense, but the videos really do help. I already knew how to knit brioche when I started blooming brioche, but I did watch the videos anyway, so it was a big help indeed. About your Intro to Stacked Stitches workshop, which you are also going to do at Munich Knits. What do you hope knitters will take away, and what are the most common challenges beginners face when they start stacked stitches?
So actually for the stacked stitch classes, what I hope people get out of it, there are two things that I hope that they get at the minimum. I want people to learn quickly whether they like doing the technique or not, because not everyone is going to enjoy it, but at least I want them to figure that out before they start working on something that's a really big project. I know I've had techniques that I end up taking a class and I immediately know I don't really want to work a big project of that technique. The other, if that's the case and they don't really like doing it, the other thing that I hope that they get out of the class is at least a few really basic beginner level techniques for different types of increases and decreases. Even if you don't enjoy doing the stacked increase and decrease, there are components of each one that are really helpful for other techniques like lace, brioche, and so on. But of course, I hope that they like the technique and that they want to use it for something as a project, and that it's, even if they don't end up going and wanting to make one of my patterns, that they find a use for it somewhere else, because it can be used for color work, or it can be used for shaping, or it can be used to make three-dimensional surfaces. So there are lots of uses for it.
And how do you adapt your teaching when you have people from different skill levels in a stitches class, for example?
Of all the classes that I teach, it actually, the stack stitch classes don't tend to be too difficult to have multiple levels in, because everyone is a beginner at that thing. So when they go to do that technique, it doesn't really matter. Every once in a while, someone in the class hasn't done a yarn over and they need that explained to them. And when that happens, it's interesting because you can see the other students kind of concerned or surprised that they don't have some of those beginner skills, but I usually say that it's suitable for advanced beginners, because if you're starting to learn increases and decreases, there's no reason that you shouldn't just keep learning bigger increases and decreases rather than moving on and learning something else that's considered the beginning of intermediate level, like cables or something like lace. It's not too hard, usually, for people who are used to learning new things. It's actually usually harder for people who are more advanced, who haven't maybe tried a new technique in a while, or expect to be able to go straight into the hard project without trying and learning first. Um, so that's it. It's less of a problem, specifically in those classes, to have all sorts of levels.
That's good to know for people. What are you most excited about going to Munich Knits, both as a teacher and as a participant?
Um, well, first of all, it's very exciting every time I get to teach in a new place. And although I visited Germany before, I have not actually been able to teach anywhere in Europe. So it's great because I get to see a new audience, or not necessarily a new audience, but it allows, you know, anyone who hasn't been able to travel to take a class with me in the past to take a class with me when I'm close to where they are. So that's the most exciting thing, is getting to see some new people or meet some people who I've never been able to meet. And of course, I'm excited for the event. I'm excited to see all the new vendors that I'm not familiar with, and to see all the yarns. Maybe to see some friends who I haven't been able to see in a few years because of travel. But I'm also really excited to see the Christmas market. I've never seen anything like that. I've seen pictures, but we don't have things like that here. So it will be exciting to get to see both the knitting event and to be there at a time of year when it's such a great travel destination.
Yes, the Christmas markets in Germany are really something. So you are going to enjoy yourself there. So that's a good catch, besides from the Munich Knits event. What are you working on now, and what new directions are you exploring at the moment?
Depending on when this goes up, some of these things might already be shown. I haven't shown some of these projects outside of I haven't shown some of these projects outside of just real life interactions that I've had with people. So at the moment, I'm working on some new brioche patterns. I was working on some little swatches. I was wondering a few weeks ago, or a few months, maybe about a month and a half ago, what would happen if you took a brioche increase and then did a stacked decrease on top of it? How three-dimensional would the fabric get? So this is the swatch that I did, and I liked it so much, I put a bunch of projects aside to make a bunch of hats that have little horns. So this should be out soon, definitely before Halloween. And I think it is a fun holiday hat as well. It depends on where you live, but sometimes um, there's a Dutch Christmas. Is Your Christmas traditions are very different than what I'm used to. So I know that you have a scarier Christmas character, um, or something. I don't know if horns are involved, but it's a good winter hat. So that's what I've been working on, is making some little hats. You have to see the baby. The baby one is the funny one. because it's so
Oh,
small.
that is so cute.
It's it's really tiny, and it's really funny because my editor was wondering why there were so many sizes. There's going to be 6 sizes, and it's because this is the smallest and this is the second largest. The
Wow.
idea being that if your yarn's a little smaller or larger, you might need, like, this is an adult size in a larger yarn, and this might be um, not not big enough if the yarn is a little thinner. So, but they are pretty funny, and I've been enjoying um, the use of the three-dimensional stitches. Again, that stacked stitch technique isn't always used just for the color work like fox paws. It also makes three-dimensional surfaces sometimes.
Another great invention. Yeah. And what if knitters feel intimidated by your more complex patterns? Which design would you suggest as a good starting point?
So if a technique is going to be really difficult, I try to make it as easy to understand as possible, or provide as many resources in a pattern. Um, so a lot of the time, I try to say, this is good for beginners, or if if you've never tried this before, here are some things to try first. Um, that's usually there. But for any technique that I do, I tend to have a few free patterns, like there's a little leaf and a star that you can make with the stacked stitches, or there's a coaster in 2-color brioche stitch that, if not teach you, they help you refresh what you've learned, or they help you just make sure that you feel like you have enough understanding to take the next step. Um, so generally for things that are kind of hard, I'll provide, a link to something free that explains it. Although, if you do really like a project and you want to make it, I always I've always noticed that people do better with something harder that they want to make than something easy that they're not really interested in making. So, um, sometimes I'll say, try this thing first, but I don't tend to recommend that anyone ever cast on a project unless you really want to finish making that project, if it's something kind of large. You mentioned the Skyvius project, which is a large half circle shawl that uses the fox paws motif, but in different sizes. It's a hard pattern, for a few reasons. It's big, it's got really long rows, it's got a complex technique, but for some reason, people tend to do really well with that pattern because it starts slowly. It grows from a small point out, so the rows don't start long. And if they're making something like that, it's something that they really want, and they're more likely to go through and do each step carefully, to read any resources, to spend time picking colors. It just makes um, the possibility of success, I think, a little higher when they want to make the project, even if it is something that's pretty hard.
And I'm just curious, one knitting tool you definitely could not live without.
I thought about this for a while. I saw the question when we were prepping. I don't know if there's any tool that I like that much besides my Addy turbos. um, I really don't like using any other needles. I like my Addies a lot, um, and I couldn't think of anything else that I was that particular about at all. That it's just,
Oh,
they're very good, and they go really, they're nice and smooth. So when you're working on something that has a lot of tension on the needles, where there are a lot of stitches that are kind of gripping the needles, they work a lot better than a less slippery needle. So those are my favorite.
If money and time were no object, what absolute dream knitting project would you design or start?
I have a project that I started designing but haven't finished because I actually don't usually get to make things for myself anymore that are just like for fun. But it's a cardigan that's made out of a very long strip of crochet. So it ends up using the crochet stack stitches. I'm still figuring out some of the areas of it. I've got a diagram, but it's based on a pattern for a sweater by a designer named Debbie New, and the sweater's it's called the Labyrinth sweater, and it's made of one long strip of knitting. It's an interesting pattern. You have to design it yourself. She gives you a formula to design the sweater, but it's not, because you have to design it yourself, it's not a quick one. So that's what I would like to spend my time on when I get time.
Awesome. And well, last question really. Where can people find your patterns and follow your work online?
The easiest place where you can find me online is on Ravelry. And it's also the best place to keep track of my new releases. I definitely always post any new patterns to Ravelry when they go live. That's the first place. But I also have a website, so if you're hoping to follow and find out where I'm teaching next, because I'm hoping to add both more dates, in Europe, in the United States, or wherever people invite me. That's usually the best place to find those classes. And again, to stay up to date on patterns, I'll always announce them through my website as well.
Okay, I will link this information below. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just about to say the same thing of the link.
Yeah, I will link the information below so people will definitely be able to find you and to check out all your beautiful patterns. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and for bringing all the wonderful samples. It was a great honor, and I can't wait to meet you in Munich in November. Thank you so much, Sandy.
Well, thank you for getting in touch. I'm really excited to see how your samples look in your yarn and to get a chance to meet you and all the attendees at the event in November. It sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Okay, we will see each other there then. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you.